All right, so hi everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those who don't know, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Today, I'm really excited. We've got 5 classes joining us from across North America. So before I introduce our speaker, I'll give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out. We've got Mrs. Olivieres, grade 4s in Independence, Missouri. Hi, guys. Hi. Okay, we've got Miss Alexander 68 in Nevada. Hi, guys. We've got Miss Rep Kings, grade 4s in Effingham, Illinois. Hi, guys. We've got Miss Tishkov's grade 8s in Woodbridge, Connecticut.
Okay, guys.
Very low pitched because you're older. And then we've got Miss Vanderwall, lone Canadian classroom, grade 7s in Milton, Ontario. Hi, guys. Sorry that my computer's not going as fast as it normally would. All right. The reason you guys are all here today is for our speaker. So we are joined live by Dr. Wynne. He is an ecologist, educator, and explorer. He has worked with organizations as diverse as the Explorers Club, NASA, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and more. He's led over 50 field expeditions around the world to places as diverse as Belize, China, Chile, Easter Island, Spain, and Hawaii. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Wynne to showcase all the great stuff that he does. Thanks so much for joining us today. And take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to join you all today. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. So what I'm going to be talking about today is cave detection technologies for looking for caves here on Earth and the implications that it has for looking for caves on other planets. Now, this is work that I've been involved with, my goodness, over the past going on about 13 years now. We first started this project back in 2005, and we've been nudging these technologies and this work along ever since. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through some of the cave detection work that we've been doing, and I'm also going to touch upon some of the other activities and work that other researchers have been doing to help move us from finding caves on Earth, using that information to look for caves on other planets, and then taking that information to getting us to the point where we can look for caves on Mars and beyond. So first off, why are caves important? Well, there's 2 reasons for that, especially when we're looking at caves on Mars. Is that firstly does life exist? Now, we know that the best place to look for evidence of life is going to be underground. And it is costly to send expensive drilling equipment and other technologies to prod and poke at the Martian surface. So my rationale has always been, why not look in those big holes that already exist? So that's what we've been proposing over the past, like I said earlier, going on 13 years now. And we're hopeful that NASA, ESA, China Space Agency, JAXA, and others will start to listen and start to poke and prod in those big holes that already exist. Another important reason for caves is that because on Mars, the surface conditions are so inhospitable, the best place to put humans is going to be underground. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to share this little 2-minute video that NASA TV produced and aired back in 2011. And this discusses the work.
Space researchers consider the most likely location for discovering potential primitive life forms on Mars to be in caves. But how do they find them? That was the goal of a recent NASA-funded airborne and ground study designed to aid in the detection of caves on the Earth, the Moon, and Mars.
The purpose of this study is to learn how to detect caves on Earth and then apply the techniques that we developed for detecting caves on Earth to looking for caves on Mars.
Wynne, a doctoral candidate at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff and a researcher at the SETI Institute, flew 2 missions aboard a NASA King Air research aircraft in April 2011. The flights over lava fields in California's Mojave Desert collected both thermal and visual imagery to aid in detection of caves.
We are basically coupling those ground-based measurements that we're currently collecting with the thermal imaging data and the vis data that we're collecting as well. Through developing techniques for detecting caves on Earth, we can then take those techniques and use them to look for caves on Mars.
NASA Goddard engineer Mersey Jabvala operated a NASA photodetector that imaged the temperature variations of the caves and surrounding surface that occur as a result of the heating effects of the sun. This thermal data will be compared with similar ground-based measurements. Wynne noted that there's a secondary reason for developing cave detection technology.
Another important aspect of the study, as it relates to the importance of Martian caves, is that these caves could also serve as astronaut shelters.
Wynne envisions this research will contribute to the development of selection criteria that could identify suitable cave targets for future robotic exploration.
If life ever existed on Mars, we're going to find that evidence underground.
All right. So in terms of finding caves on both the Earth and Mars, what we've done here is we've designed, colleagues and I have designed this idea or mission architecture that basically can lay out a blueprint for how we can do that. And you can see here there are 4 distinct steps to get us from finding caves to actually using caves and looking for evidence of life. And what I'd like to emphasize here is that the first 2 here, this has everything to do with finding caves and evaluating caves. And first, let's look at remote detection, specifically looking at remote detection of caves on Earth and how we can use that information to look for caves elsewhere. And this is some of the work that we've been doing. As you saw earlier, we flew an aircraft mission, actually 2 aircraft missions, to collect thermal imagery. And then we were also working in the Big Island of Hawai'i to examine features that looked a lot like the caves on Mars. And we were studying them. You can see me here. I'm deploying a temperature instrument that was recording hourly temperature data. And we collected data for over a year. And then we were modeling using a lot of math. And we were developing models to see how these caves were behaving thermally and then relating that to caves on Mars. This is just an example of how a thermal imaging camera can, quote, see caves. You can see here what we did for this particular experiment. This was very early on. This was the part of the very early stages of our work here. What we did is we basically just sat a thermal imaging camera in front of a cave entrance. We did this during the late evening, before the sun came up, early afternoon and late afternoon. And what you can see here is in the early evening and in the pre-dawn images, you can see that it's really easy to find the caves. They pretty much glow. But if you look at the early afternoon and the late afternoon, you can see that it's very difficult, a lot more difficult to find the cave. And this was something that was really instructive for us because we're like, okay, well, it looks like these 2 conditions up here are when we should be looking for caves. And down here, we might still be able to find some caves, but it's going to be a lot more challenging. This is from a skylight entrance in the southern Mojave Desert in California. And what you can see here is this is basically a cartoon or a video that we captured. We basically compiled images that we took of this cave entrance every 10 minutes over a 24-hour period. And you can see how it changes over time. If we look at this image in the top left, you can see this one was taken at midnight. And you can see once again, this entrance really glows. When you look at this particular entrance that was taken at 12 noon, same entrance rather, You can see that it's this dark color, and the surrounding surface is very hot, very warm, and you can see it glowing in this as a whitish grayish color. Our concerns have always been that with really small entrances, the surrounding surface, because it warms up significantly during the day because the sun hits it and warms it up, that it's going to be difficult to find caves under those conditions. And what we did is, fast forwarding from our early work to recent work that was from the data collected in 2011, what we did is we took those images and we applied a lot of math and programming to asking some serious questions about how can we best. What we were doing was we were milking as much information as we possibly could out of that data that we collected. And it takes math and programming to do that. And you're going to hear me emphasize this a couple of times through this talk, the importance of math and computer science for this type of work. So if you all are interested in doing this type of work, those are the sort of things that you need to be focusing on. You need to be really strong in those two areas. So up in this top right image here, we have the cave locations within the red circles. And we took two sets of imagery. We flew two missions. We flew a pre-dawn image, and we're calling it night imagery. And you can see the caves here. They're glowing, as we have seen in previous examples of thermal imagery. This is what we were expecting to see. And when we look at the day imagery down here, you can see that it is, well, you can see some of these features, but they become, they're kind of blended in with the surface. And that's where the math and the programming comes in. That's where we can really try to milk some of this information out of the images. Also, what we did, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but what we did is we took as we know that a computer image is made up of pixels. And each one of the pixels, even in just a photograph of you and your friends, there's going to be numbers associated with each one of those pixels. Each pixel is going to be assigned a number. And that's no different here. So with these particular images, you have pixel values for each one of the individual pixels. And what we did is we subtracted the daytime pixels from the nighttime pixels within these two image sets and created this additional image set. Once again, a lot of math, a lot of programming, and we then had these four different data sets, or three different data sets that we were going to use to then do this. Once again, math is important here. We created these different layers using computer algorithms. We created these different types of layers, which then became information layers, which we were then able to apply a lot more math and a lot more statistics to be able to see if we can find caves. This is the end result, and this was really exciting. What we have here is we have confirmed cave locations, which are underneath these green vertical lines. The predicted cave locations based on our modeling and our statistics were these red spikes. And what you can see here is we have a lot of correspondence between what we predicted to be caves and what were confirmed as caves. So that shows us that the methods that we were using, all of that statistics, all of that math, was spot on in terms of being able to detect caves. And this was really cool. And you can see a couple of other examples in the image here before us, that we actually have predicted locations for caves that we will then, once we publish this paper on this work, we will then have to then go out to the field and look at these sites and see if they are indeed cave locations. Pretty exciting stuff. We were really overjoyed with our results here. This when everything comes together in this perfect storm of events and we can find what we're looking for. In other words, we have signal in the data. That's a great accomplishment for us, and we were really stoked when that happened. Moving right along through our mission architecture diagram here, we're now going from remote detection of caves, in this particular example from Earth, to candidate selection and evaluation of caves elsewhere. In this particular case, once again, on Mars. This is important, once again, for two reasons. One, robotics, and we would use robots to look for evidence of life, to actually go deep within those caves and permit the robot to see what it can see and to relay that information back to us here on Earth, and to identify the best locations for human outposts, for places where humans can live safely. And we're going through this process of identifying, characterizing, and detecting caves. This was done back in 2007, where a colleague of mine was poring over these images of Mars, and lo and behold, found these 7 features, which he named after aunts, nieces, and cousins. And these are all what we're identifying as cave-like features. And this was really cool for us because everything that you just saw in those previous images were when we were looking at images of Earth caves, well, it proved to be the same on Mars. And this is exactly what we expected to find, but this was really cool that we saw this congruency. This image here, this is a thermal image from Mars, which was captured during the hottest part of the day at 3 o'clock. Where's the cave, you might ask? Well, we were thinking the same thing. It was very difficult to resolve in this particular image. If we go to the pane in this figure number C, at 400 hours in the morning, right before the sun came up, boy, look at that. Glows like a Christmas tree. That's exactly what we were hoping to find, and that's exactly what we found when we looked at these images of these 7 different cave features. All of them behave similarly, further reinforcing that, yes, indeed, these are indeed possible cave features. And this particular image I wanted to share with you all because it just demonstrates the enormity of these features. This is from the HiRISE platform, which is an orbiter platform that is currently going around Mars. It captures images at 30 centimeter resolution, which is absolutely spectacular. But the really cool thing about a lot of these features on Mars is that they're really big. This is a 90-meter long soccer field, and if it was nice and flat down below, we could actually play a game of soccer in that particular feature. Also, a really exciting thing that I would like to share with you all is researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey here in Flagstaff, Arizona, have now identified at least 1,200 pit craters and cave-like features on Mars. They're currently compiling the Mars Cave Database, which will be available through the USGS's website. And you can look at all these images. You can see where all of these features are located. It's a huge leap forward towards getting us to that point where we can evaluate those features and identify which ones we would like to send in robots to look for evidence of life, and which of those features are going to be most appropriate for human habitation. And now let's move on to robotic exploration. Once again, we're looking for evidence of life. Well, there are several different robotic platforms that are currently under development. This is one that my good friend Aaron Parness with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California has been moving forward. I guess we could say inching forward. He has made a lot of progress towards advancing the technology, but we still have a very long ways to go. This is an image taken of us working and test driving LEMUR is what it's called in the Mojave Desert. And you can see here, I am belaying the robot, and I will go down in history as the first human being to belay a robot. And I think that's pretty cool, but I would say it's going to be really cool when it's the other way around, when I'm climbing around here and there's a robot belaying me. But where we are with this particular technology, things are moving forward, but they're moving forward quite slowly. This is the 2nd generation LEMUR robot. What it has on these individual toes here are a series of spines that enable it to grab hold of the rock. You can see here Dr. Parnes featured with his baby. This is LEMUR once again. And you can see that it's able to grip onto the rock surface of the cave entrance. For this particular experiment, things were moving forward very slowly. You can see up here in the top left corner of the image, there is an engineer. She has a computer, and she's basically telling the robot how to do everything. How to move how to release its foot, how to retract it, how to move it forward. Everything had to be done via command line programming. This is the third generation LEMUR. LEMUR is looking cooler. LEMUR has a brand new look. You can see here it actually has eyes. There is a stereoscopic set of cameras on it. It also had a couple of instruments that enabled it to look for evidence of life. And obviously what it's doing here is it's looking on Earth. And there's also some AI, some artificial intelligence capabilities programmed into this LEMUR robot. The idea being at some point that LEMUR will be able to make similar decisions to humans in terms of rock climbing. It will be able to look at a rock surface, be able to anticipate its next 3 to 4 moves, and then make those moves accordingly. It will also be able to, using the information that is stored in its computer, be able to examine things within a cave that we have identified as being lifelike on Earth, that, in other words, represent microbes, microbial activity on cave walls, and be able to take that information and ultimately at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to send LEMUR into a cave on Mars, and it will be able to look for evidence of life. This was a news article that ran a couple of years ago. In addition to the microspine technology that LEMUR has for climbing cave walls, it also has this gecko gripper technology that is interchangeable on these robots that can be used for walking around on the exterior of a spacecraft. And basically, the experiments that are taking place right now on the International Space Station is that we are priming LEMUR to become a real-life R2-D2. It will be able to walk along the exterior of a spacecraft, inspect the spacecraft for hull breaches, and be able to report back to the astronauts working at a computer panel in real time, and then the astronauts can make decisions in terms of how they want to move forward. So moving these two types of technologies, this gecko gripper technology and the rock climbing microspine technology together in unison, we're hopeful that in some point in the not too distant future that we will be able to send a LEMUR-like crawling robot into a cave on Mars. So now let's look at human outposts and the type of technologies that we would need to do this. Now, first off, what I would like to emphasize is that all of these technologies for human outposts are in the earliest stages of development. We have a very, very long time to go before we will have these technologies to a point where we will be able to use them on another planet. But the two most critical questions that we have to address here, once again, where do we put the humans in terms of the best cave locations? And two, how do we work and live safely underground? Those are critically important. Once again, the technologies are not there yet to where we could do those two things reliably and safely. This is an example of, this is an artist concept that was produced last year. You can see here by the date in the top right corner. This is what SpaceX and Elon Musk believe a human colony may look like at some point on Mars. I have issues with this particular diagram. I don't think it's realistic. I think some of this infrastructure is likely to occur. Obviously, you don't want to put rockets underground. I guess you could if the cave was really big, but in most cases, these type of platforms, launch pads are going to be quite useful. But all of this surface infrastructure could be problematic. First and most importantly, as with Earth, it occurs on Mars as well. Both planets are constantly bombarded by cosmic radiation. On Earth, we're very lucky. We have an atmosphere. We have the Van Allen belts, which are magnetic belts that are generated from the Earth's molten core of magma, and that basically produces this protective shell that keeps us safe, that enables us to live. If we did not have an atmosphere, if we did not have those Van Allen belts, we would not be able to live on the surface of planet Earth. Well, Mars barely has an atmosphere and is constantly bombarded by cosmic radiation. So these particular structures would need to be significantly insulated with lead and water, or water rather. The problem being is that those two components are very heavy, and they would cost a lot to get to Mars. There is water on Mars, so there is the possibility that we could transport water from other locations, in particular the poles, to a particular outpost like this to be able to properly insulate those human habitation structures. But it would be incredibly difficult to do so. Another problem is dust storms. Now, Mars is engulfed in dust storms at a global proportion at least every decade or so. The last global dust storm that occurred on Mars was this year. This is ESA, the European Space Agency, has a satellite orbiting Mars. This is one of their images. And you can see this is an image of the dust about to cover this portion of Mars. It covered the entire portion. It actually arrested activities of rovers that were combing the surface of Mars because they had to shut down because the solar panels wouldn't work. So there are a lot of things that we need to overcome technologically to get us to a point where a human base on the surface or even underground would be viable. So once again, what I'm emphasizing here, and I'll be doing this ad nauseum, is the importance of settling or constructing human settlements underground. We have 1,200 features that we now need to evaluate to figure out which would be the best. And while these rigid structures may indeed be part of that equation, I would suggest that something like this is going to be more likely, at least in the short term. This is a inflatable habitation pod that my colleague, Dr. Pablo de Leon out of the University of North Dakota, has been developing. And the idea being is that when it's not inflated, it's going to be very small, which means you could fit it quite easily into a rocket payload. And because it would be smaller than a rigid habitation pod, you could put more stuff in that particular payload. And once you got it to Mars, you could insert it into a cave, inflate it, and calculations have been made to determine that all we would need is a roof of about 20 meters thick to properly insulate this habitation pod from the very damaging and damning, well, actually lethal cosmic radiation. Regarding spacesuits and other technologies, that's what we also have to do. What I'm calling this is, it's basically a Batman toolkit is what I envision having to be designed. And this would enable speleonauts, speleology being the study of caves, speleonauts being astronauts that are living in caves and working in caves. We would need to have the technology that would enable us to be able to rappel into these pits, that would enable us to climb safely out of the pits and be able to crawl around on the cave surface if we needed to. You can see here, this is a prototype spacesuit. They're still very much in the Michelin Man model here. They're very bulky. They're not very, you don't have a lot of movability. You can't really, there's not much agility permitted in these type of things. You're basically wearing this big padded suit. Also, these suits would be subject to breach, to ripping and tearing if you were trying to move through a cave. So knees will need to be reinforced. Elbows will need to be reinforced. We'll need special gloves like this, in addition to this Batman toolkit that we're envisioning that would enable us to live and work safely in caves on Mars. So in essence, what I'm advocating here is that in order for us to go to Mars, we are once again going to have to become cavemen and cavewomen. It might look a little different than our Neanderthal ancestors. What we would have here is something similar to this artist concept in terms of what it would what our existence would be like. And just to wrap this talk up, I would like to emphasize that advances have indeed been made in terrestrial cave detection. We've been working on this question and actually a problem rather for over a decade now, and significant advances have been made. We still have more research to do. We have a lot more work to do before we have it down to an exact science, but we are getting there. Also, and this to me is really exciting, is that the more spacecraft we have orbiting planets throughout our solar system with high resolution optics to examine the surface of those planetary bodies, the more caves we're likely to discover. And thus the more exploration targets that we will be able to add to that list of potential candidate sites for exploration. We now know that there are these deep cracks made of ice that go deep into the subsurface of Enceladus, Titan, Triton, Europa. Those are moons of Jupiter and Saturn. We also have over 200 caves identified on the moon. We have the primary vents associated with cryovolcanoes, ice volcanoes on Pluto. So we already know of a lot of places throughout our solar system that has caves or cave-like features, but we expect that number to grow as we progress forward in exploring our solar system. Also, robotic and human technologies for exploring caves on other planets are in the earliest stages of development. We still have a considerable amount of work ahead of us in order for us to develop those technologies to the point where they could be readily applied to a Mars mission. And as I mentioned earlier, and I sound like a broken record, but it's the truth, settlement of other planets, in particular Mars, will require humans to use caves at least in the early stages. And that will be part of the equation. There's really no way around it. So to wrap up here, you all are most likely going to be the generation that will be going to Mars, that will be going to the moon. We will most likely have bases in both of those on both of those planetary bodies by the time you all are my age. So if you want to go to Mars, study. Very important. Question everything. The curiosity that you have now, never let it die. Continue to question everything. Read. Be a voracious reader. Read everything. Read literature. Read history. Just soak up everything you can like a sponge. Stay in shape and repeat. And one day you all might very well make it to the red planet. And with that, thank you all so much for your time. And I am going to remove this shared screen and we can now take some questions.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Dr. Wynne. All right. I know we're getting short on time, but some of the classes are going to need to leave soon. So we'll do this as quickly as possible and hopefully get a question from every class. We'll start with Mrs. Olivieri's class. If you guys have a question, come on up.
Give me just a second here. My screen is locked up.
Okay, but we can still see you.
Yeah. Oh, you can't see me. Okay. All right, good.
Now, Ms. Olivieri, I know there's been some mic issues with you guys, but you should be demuted to go. And if not, we'll come back to you guys in a minute, okay? Which we might need to do, unfortunately. But I appreciate the enthusiasm. You got so many kids there. Okay, so we're going to come back to Ms. Olivieri's class in just a second. Worst case, if the mic doesn't work, little blue rectangle top of your screen, top left of your screen, and you can type in questions there. Let's go to Ms. Alexander's class while we're waiting.
Oh, a minute. Oh, he's working on it. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Why would you start to explore another planet if you didn't know most of our planet?
That is quite an astute question, and a great one at that. Well, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I guess first I would say we are all explorers. Ever since our earliest human ancestors, we have always wondered what is beyond the horizon, what is on the other side of that hill. Yes, we still have a lot to explore here on planet Earth, but we also have a lot to explore in our solar system. So I would say that that curiosity, that desire to explore, is a very good reason for us to do that. Secondly, the technology that will be born out of such a human, that will be born out of a human mission to another planet. Technology that can help humanity, that can make life here on Earth for humans more comfortable. For example, they are pushing forward, scientists are pushing forward synthetic cell technologies to figure out how to make, for example, synthetic blood. So a human mission to another planet is going to require significant advances of those technologies. So that's going to make life better here on Earth, right? So you wouldn't need to have a blood transfusion that is actually real blood. You could have a synthetic blood transfusion, which may be more readily available, especially if you have a rare blood type and you're in a remote area.
All right. Excellent, Dr. Wynne. Your video is cutting in and out, but that's okay. We can handle that. Miss Olivieri's class, I tried your mic again. I don't know why it's not working. So yeah, do go to that little chat bar, top left of your screen, drag your mouse over your screen, and you can type in a question there. I'll pass it on directly. In the meantime, again, we'll go to Miss Rep King's class. If you guys have a question, good to go.
Have you ever had to spend the night in a cave?
Yes, I have, and it's awesome. I've done it a few times, and it was the few times that I've done it were up on North Rim Grand Canyon, and it was the most comfortable and the safest place for us to stay. We were working in these caves on this big cliff, and there wasn't a lot of room to put 5 people. So we decided to sleep in the cave. And in one of the caves, which has to be one of the coolest things I've done so far in my life, in the entrance of one of the caves where we were sleeping, there were these platforms that had been created by the Native Americans. And they were sleeping platforms, and they were completely smooth. They were devoid of rocks, and there were rocks around each one of the platforms. And that's where we actually slept. And it was really neat because we were the first humans since the Native Americans to have slept in that cave.
Very cool. All right, our question from Miss Olivieri's class is, if you're living on Mars, how do you get back to the Earth?
Another good question. Well, you know, what is it? It's a 6-month trip right now. And we also know that, you know, the Earth and other planets that orbit stars are in elliptical orbit. So it's not a perfectly circular orbit. And because of that, there are times in which the planets are closer together in their elliptical orbital paths and further apart. So the idea being is that in order to get back to Earth, astronauts would need to already have a vehicle waiting, either orbiting Mars or on the surface of Mars, ready to take humans back when they went. There's something else that has been done. It's obviously it's in its conceptual stages. Buzz Aldrin, the second person to set foot on the moon, he's also a brilliant physicist. He developed something called the Aldrin cycler, which basically put 2 spacecraft in orbit, in Earth orbit and Martian orbit, and they're in very distant orbits. And at some point, those two orbital paths are close together, enabling astronauts to basically leapfrog from one spacecraft to the other spacecraft. That's another way around it. But yeah, we need to have a plan to get people back before we send people in the first place.
All right. And then unfortunately, we're going to do one more last question because we're very short on time. But Miss Tishkoff's class, if you guys have a question.
Okay, Ross, you ready? Nice and loud.
Do you think that mission to Mars will affect the way that we treat our planet in a negative way or a positive way?
Good question.
Boy, that's a really good question as well. I would hope that it would compel us to treat planet Earth with much more care and compassion. I'm not gonna mince words here, y'all. We're at a pivotal point in the Earth's history, and you all are going to bear the brunt of the problems that me and my parents and grandparents have created. During the 60s, when you all are aware of that photograph of planet Earth from the moon, it was entitled Earthrise. That was largely responsible for heralding in the environmental movement. When we were able to see pictures of Earth from space, that also pushed the environmental movement forward, because we're able to see that there are no geopolitical boundaries separating countries. There's just ocean and green, which is the continents and islands on our planet. And I'm very passionate about protecting what is left. We can only be optimistic and hope that whatever we do moving forward, that we will do so in a manner in which promotes good stewardship. And I know that's probably not the answer you all were looking for, but we just have to remain positive. And you guys have to work to help this situation as well. And at some point, you all might very well be responsible for engineering our way out of this mess that we've created for ourselves.
All right. Dr. Wynne, before we let you go, is there any last message you want to share with the classes about how they can end up doing a job like you might? You sort of wrapped up your talk this way anyway, but is there any last thing you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, I would say that, and thank you, Jesse, that I appreciate having this opportunity to wrap things up, because, the answer to that question is a little dark. What I want to end with is that, make the right decisions. Think about things that we're doing here right now. I've changed the way that I purchase things, the way that I purchase groceries, because of single-use plastics. I drive less. I commute on a bike, or I walk more. Those are things that we can all do. You all go home, talk to your parents. If you have a cabinet and it has a box of plastic straws bad. Get compostable straws instead. We can make these decisions. Eat organic. Buy cleaning products that are all natural, that don't buy into corporations and help fuel the chemical industries. All these things we can all do. We can, what was it? Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see in the world. And that's what we have to do. We have to be the change.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much for joining us again today, Dr. Wynne. What we do at the end of every hangout is I'm going to demute everyone's microphone. So Miss Olivieri's class, Miss Alexander's class, Miss Reptine's class, Miss Tishkoff's class. If you guys could join me in saying a big thank you to Dr. Wynne for spending time with us today. And we hope you guys will hang out soon. Dr. Wynne, we'll have you back. And everyone, have a wonderful day.